Other questions?
Nope, I guess I'm all set.
Interview of Mr. Donald Walter May on 30 March 2001. Syracuse Armory. Interviewer is Lieutenant Colonel Robert von Hassel, and videographer is Mr. Wayne Clark. Mr. May, where and when were you born?
I was born in Syracuse, New York, on the north side.
What year?
1926, August 4.
And did you grow up in Syracuse?
Oh, yes, sir.
Go to high school here?
I never went to high school. I went to junior high and then enlisted.
Oh, okay. And what was life like in Syracuse when you were growing up? What was your family like? What did you do?
I had an older brother, 18 months older than, well, let me start again. I was the baby, my sister, and then my brother. Each one of them were 18 months older than I was. I was, so I'm told, kind of sickly because I had a lot of ailments. And I guess I was the run to the litter, so to speak. Life in Syracuse was poor. It was during the Depression. We were rich if we had clean socks, whole clean socks. We were rich if we could go out to the garden and pick a tomato without bringing it up for supper. But we had fun. We played simple games, games that you either created or made yourself. And school was a drag for me because I had ADD as a child. Nobody knew what it was then, but I had it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was always the troublemaker of the class, and so therefore I was always either in the principal's office or being scolded for something.
Mm-hmm.
One teacher in the third grade of Webster School, that's on the north side, said that I was so disruptive that she flunked me 3 times in the third grade. So I was like 45 when I got to junior high. I mean, that's parallel. So I had a lot of nice buddies on the street, and we used to, I'm just digressing here, I'm just what's ever in my mind. We used to have a lot of things to do in the street. There was only one block long with no curbs, so we used to paint what we wanted in the center of the street, like a tennis court, and we'd block off both ends and get indignant when a car came down because this was our playing field. You have no right to come down there. Of course, they lived there, but so we did a lot of neighborhood things, and you did go too far from the neighborhood because you stayed in your own. There were sections. There was an Italian section, a German section, Polish, etc. And if you went out of the section that you were in, you had to be careful because if they didn't like you, they'd do a number on you. Mm-hmm. I liked the north side. I lived on Schiller Ave for years. That's right near Schiller Park. And we used to go up to the park and ski and, play a lot of games up there. Some of the memories from Schiller Ave was around the corner was a theater called the Schiller Show, movie theater. And it was all German neighborhood, very, very German. Some of them didn't even speak English. So we used to go to the bakery and get day-old cookies. We used to go to the butcher shop and get the ends of a link of bologna, go to the movies for 5 cents, and stay there for hours. And that was our meal. And it was great because you learned a lot. You saw a lot of movies. And there was always a talent show. Always a talent show of some kind. You sing, dance, whatever. I used to sing God Bless America every time and come in second every time. I used to get prizes for that. But then as I'm growing up, I went to junior high. And I had some good teachers there. I learned a lot. Mechanical drafting was my specialty. I really liked that. And we had a music teacher called Mrs. Lutz, and she gave you an instrument for your size. If you're a big guy, you got a big bass violin. If you're a little guy, you got a flute or whatever. So my buddy that I grew up with, Bob Runyon, who lived around the corner, he and I were big guys, so we got the bass violin. Neither one of us could play a note, but we winged it. And Bob used to say later, I'm glad you could play because I was listening to you. I said, Bob, I couldn't play. I was listening to you, so neither one of us could play music. It was kind of funny. Bob Runyon lived around the corner, like I said, and we used to bum around. I used to go up there on Saturdays because he had always had a lot of work to do. I never had much to do around the house because my mother felt that she had to do everything. It was just her thing. So I used to go up to Bob's house and help him out with his chores so we could play on Saturday. One of the things I helped him out is his father used to have a liquor cabinet, and we found out how to open it up. We were about 14, 15. Found out how to open the liquor cabinet, and we were sampling the liquors, then watering them up because we didn't want anybody to see that it was being used. So we got playing, and we got get going together. He knew this family called the Greens, Horace and Eileen Green, and they had a daughter, Helene Green. And they were buddies with Mr. and Mrs. Runyon. Well, I was always incorporated because wherever I went, wherever Bob went, I went. Well, they brought this girl up, Helene Green, and she went to a Catholic school downtown. And she was about 12-ish, 13-ish, something like that. And I didn't like this girl at all. I hated this girl because she was snobbish. And there's more about that later because I married her. But anyway, we used to bum around together, and then I kind of grew up and lost interest in high school, and that's about the time the war started.
Do you remember where you were when you first heard about Pearl Harbor?
I was in school. I was in school in the ninth grade. And they cut off all the things in school, and they announced it over the PA system that that was in 1941. No, I had to be younger than that. I'm no good at math. I had to be younger than I had to be younger. Anyway, I was in school at the time, and we all were upset about it because we really didn't understand it. Because we didn't know even where Pearl Harbor was unless we looked at a map. Because that was a billion miles away. We felt sorry for everybody, and then we kept up with the news because all we had was radio then, no television at all. And we relied on whatever came over the radio, and they were assembling troops and assembling material excuse me, for the war effort, and it increased as it went along. Being despondent in school, and all my buddies were going in service one way or another. Well, just before I quit school, I worked at a print shop downtown with 3 other kids, Ozzie, Leroy Osborne, and Bob Powers, and Ed Mahar was in there too. And we all were going to quit work and join. We were all going to join the Navy. Well, we did eventually, but everybody went separate directions. I thought I would be with one of the guys, but I never made it. We all went separate directions. Powers went into the submarines, and I forget the rest of them. So I got very despondent in school, so I figured I'm not going to knock myself out anymore because I'm going to a place, and here I am almost like 9th grade and 17 or whatever. I was old for the class because of the failures in the 3rd grade. So I says, I'm going in service. So I went home and told my mother and father that I wanted to join. And my dad was in the Navy. I'm sorry, my dad was in the Army. And his father was in the Army. And he says, you're going to join the Army? I said, no, I'm going to join the Navy. Well, he got indignant because I was breaking the pattern. And I said, I don't want to go in the Army. I says, I'll do whatever, but I don't want to go in the Army. So I finally talked my mother into signing, and I signed, and she signed, and I got in the Navy. So the 4 of us went down to the Empire Hotel, which was directly across the street from the City Hall. That's where we were inducted. That's where we signed all the papers and blah, blah, blah. Then we went to the Jefferson Street Armory for a physical, and there were like 500 guys all in their birthday suits wandering around here and there. to do whatever medical things that you had to do, including shots and whatnot. Then they sent us home. So a while later, they called us back and they put us on a bus. And we went to, I think it was Newport News, Rhode Island. And that's where we started to get our uniforms and stuff. Yeah, that's when we started to get our uniforms and stuff. Then we went to, back to Geneva, where we took our boots. 8 weeks of boots.
Is that at Sampson?
That's at Sampson, yes, sir. Sampson, New York, which is west of Syracuse, about 40, 50 miles, whatever. And we had 8 weeks of boots. That was interesting because everybody says, you marched with a gun. I said, no, I never in my 2 years or whatever in the Navy carried a gun, never. And that was odd because usually service people carry guns in one form or another. But they did make us run around the grinder, which is the track around the baseball field, with full pack. And the full pack weighed 80 pounds. And they made you run, not walk, run. And if you made it once, you were lucky. Then the swimming course was an Olympic-sized swimming pool, and you had to go around that twice. Well, I don't know how I made it, but I made it. And we always had classes to go to, identification classes of planes and boats, ships, and all that other bit. And then we went through what do you call it, the gas test. You put on this gas mask that leaked, and you went through this building that was all full of gas, and if you survived that, you were lucky. And several other things like that. It wasn't torture, but it was the next thing to it because they wanted to toughen you up. Excuse me.
Were most of the guys you were with at Sampson also from New York?
Yeah. We had a lot of kids from New York City. I guess most of them were on the Jewish side, but I never really knew that. But we had, in our company was like 200 and some odd guys. And I understand that in boot camp, while I was asleep, 2 guys committed suicide. Like I say, it's hearsay because I was asleep. When I go to sleep, I don't know anything because I sleep. But anyway, there was a lot of ruckus, and I got in trouble a couple of times. I asked permission. Yes, I had permission to breathe because they wanted to toughen you up. I asked permission to wash my sheets, and I got permission, and I hung them out on the line. When I come back, they were in the mud, and I was a little discouraged. I went to the officer in charge, which was just a petty officer at the time, and I said, what happened? And he said, you had no right to do that. And I said, hey, I had permission, blah, blah, blah. So I got hasty, and he put me on 4 midnight to 4 in the morning watches, on top of all the other duties. That was my punishment. Picking up cigarette butts in the dark and patrolling the area for whatever. But that was the toughest thing that I ever went through, discipline-wise, in the boot camp.
Tell me, what did Sampson physically look like?
Sampson was huge. It reminds you of airplane hangars. The buildings were so huge. And each corner of, or each section of the building, they had a different thing. Like one corner they had a swimming pool, and one corner they had movie screens to tell you the silhouettes of ships and planes, and another corner they had something else, and then they had the little drill field there in the center. And but there was a lot of those buildings, and they had a huge mess hall. And when I say huge, they probably fed 1,000 at a shot. But there were a lot of people there. But 8 weeks isn't much to train somebody to do a job, especially at this magnitude. But everybody went through it, and everybody did their bit. But Sampson was a big, big place. Once you're in there, you're in there. You didn't get out till your boots were finished. Let's see, what happened after that? Then we went home for a while, and then they shipped us up to, I think it was Newport News, Connecticut. and we lived in Quonset huts there. Well, it was hot during the day, and it was hotter in the Quonset huts. And you drilled, and you went to classes, and all that other stuff.
Were you in a special school at Newport, or?
No, I was just with the group. Some of them went to submarine school, some of them went to signalman school, whatever, but I was just with a group. We had different classes and different things, but I was never segregated for a specific task.
Was this New London, Connecticut?
Oh, I'm sorry, it could have been the New London, yes. Yes, I believe it was, but that's a submarine school, and I never got wound up with the submarines. Let's see, if memory serves me right, we went to the Brooklyn Navy Yard after that. Yeah, we went to the Brooklyn Navy Yard after that. And one of my jobs was to escort the armored trucks into the base and pay the civilian workers. Well, that was interesting because you sat on bags of thousands of dollars, which made you feel good, but you can't touch. So they paid the civilian workers very good because I guess they worked around the clock to get the ships ready and repairs and et cetera. And so they paid real good. So that was one of my jobs. Another one of my jobs was cleaning the johns. Well, I didn't mind that because it only took me 2 hours and the rest of the day was mine. And weekends I used to go home and come back again. That was great. Stayed there a few weeks. I don't remember how, maybe 8-10 weeks. Then they said I should be a guard in the brig. I hated that job because they bring you drunks in the middle of the night and they bring you all kinds of guys. My job, the puny as I was, to lock them up. Well, some of these guys were big, and being a coward that I was, I didn't want to do it, so I asked out of that, and I got out of that. Luckily, our ship was being built, and I was assigned to be a guard on the ship before it was completely built. Superstructure wasn't on it, and but that was nice because I saw the progression of building of a ship.
Was this at Brooklyn Navy Yard?
That's correct, sir. Yes, Brooklyn Navy Yard. Finally, when it got all built and they got the supplies and everything else aboard, we took a short cruise down to, I think it was Port Orange, New Jersey, for magnetize or demagnetize. I have yet to figure out which we did, but anyway, we went down there. They ran big cables all around the ship, and like I say, demagnetize or whatever.
Yeah, degaussing.
I'm sorry?
Called degaussing, demagnetizing.
Okay, demagnetizing. Okay, that's cleared up. Then we went to the Chesapeake for a shakedown. We did everything there, speed up and stop and turns, and they really worked you because they wanted you to get familiar with your part of the ship and doing your job. I was on the deck force at that time, which means chipping paint and any other greasing cables, because it was a cargo ship, and you had these huge booms with all these cables, so you had to grease the cables. That was interesting because you sat on a little chair way up high, like I'm going to say maybe 50 feet in the air, and you sat on this little chair with buckets of grease on each side of you, and you had a gob full of grease, and as they let you down, you'd grease these 10 or 15 cables. Well, if there was a burr on the cable, you got a burr on your hand, which made it blood, which worked with the grease, which was something else. But after you got down, this was part of the deck force job. Then when it came to loading provisions on, that was another one of our jobs. We used to have to let the hook come over with big cables and put them on dockside and pick up where we ever had to pick up. There would be a crew down there putting the cables in proper place. They'd hoist the thing aboard, we'd put it in the hole, take off the cables and block it. We did that in the Brooklyn Navy Yard until we had a full cargo. Then we went down to Norfolk, Virginia. Let me back up here. I entered service in February of 1944. Mm-hmm. So the war was pretty well in progression when I got in. I had no idea which side of the oceans I was going on, and I didn't care. at that point, but I'm glad I went on the Pacific side because it was a lot warmer. So then back to the Norfolk, Virginia, we unloaded the cargo there again, and we took up more cargo. Same principle. Sometimes we took oil, barrels of oil, sometimes crates of whatever. Any cargo that needed to go from one place to another. We went down through the Panama Canal loaded with this cargo. And that was, Panama Canal was interesting because I never thought I'd get any place out of Syracuse, but I did. And that was very, very interesting going through the canal. We had liberty one night in Balboa. Well, believe me, you don't want to go to Balboa. It was nothing. So then we finally went through the canal, and we went up to San Francisco, and we unloaded again. And we took on high-test gas, detonators, airplane fuel, real touchy stuff. So our destination was Honolulu. No smoking. And I guess it took us about 3 or 4 days to get there because we were in convoy. Convoy meant for our ship on the corner. We used to call it Coffin's Corner because if any ship was going to get blown up, that would be the first one. But luckily, we zigzagged quite a bit, and there was no smoking, of course. And we made it without a problem. We got to Honolulu, and we unloaded again. I don't know how long we stayed at Honolulu, but that was a great city. We had Liberty in Pearl Harbor. That was interesting. Did a lot of things and ate a lot of different food over there. Then we loaded again, and we went. Well, I'm going to say there's lots of islands in the Pacific: New Guinea, Fiji, Eniwetok, Philippines, and on and on and on. And I think we hit just about every one of them, unloading and loading cargo. And all the time you did your deck force jobs, like grease the cable and chip the paint, and you aired your bedding every so often because it was hot and stuffy down in the hold, even during the day, so that they brought your bedding up, and you had to air that out. And you turned your clothes into the laundry to be washed periodically, and but you still chipped your paint, and you didn't wear a sun hat at all. You wore this little Navy hat. Well, I got cute and painted my hat the same color as the deck. Well, J.P. Clark was our captain at the time, and he looked down and he says, "What Navy are you in?" And I told him, and he says, "Get rid of the hat." And I started to walk down below. He says, "No, now." So I threw it over the side, got another hat. He was happy with that. But we unloaded everything. We went to New Guinea. Was interesting. They had the natives there, and they were real tall, and they had real bushy hair, say like standing out maybe 8-10 inches from the head in a circle, and it was flat on top and colored orange, purple, green, whatever. That was the style. That was their custom. But they were real tall, real friendly, and I took a lot of tours there on my own with a bunch of guys because I'd probably never be back there, and I thought the island would be interesting to see. And it was very interesting. But it was a lot of military stuff there. And stuff was on the beach that I don't think should have been on the beach, like butter. It was on the beach, and you could see it melting out of the cartons, and then I thought, why don't they do something with this? Well, after analyzing it, I figured, it was tough to get it from here to there in a short period of time, blah, blah, blah. So I could figure that out. So then we went back to Pearl. We'd always going back to Pearl for a different cargo and bringing it back to one of the islands. One of the interesting islands we went to was Eniwetok. If you remember anything about Eniwetok, well, that was one of the atomic bombs exploded.
Right.
And we bought a bunch of civilian cars. We had them all over the deck and in the hold to Eniwetok because they wanted to test the reaction on the cars from this atomic explosion. We weren't there for the explosion, but we just brought a lot of stuff there. Then we loaded someplace, I don't know whether it was Hawaii or not, and we went over to Philippines, a place called Luzon, which is on the western side of the Philippines, and a little place called Dulag. That was a major battle. That was a real major battle. We were there 2 nights and 2 days, continuously firing, continuously unloading, and there were tons of ships there, all kinds of firing back at, there were big ships firing shells to the shore, and I understand that there was small Japanese PT boats coming in, and they dropped guys off, the Japanese guys off, in the water with a bag of grenades, and they would swim up to a ship and lob the grenades on the deck of the ship just to do havoc, because that was the war bit, and we had to also be alerted for that. I never held a gun, like I said. I never shot anybody, but I would if I had to. So we stayed there quite a bit, and then we went to the other side of the island, a place called Mindanao. We stayed there just like overnight, and I understand a couple of guys jumped ship there, but that's hearsay. Then we went back to some place and loaded up again, and we went back to the eastern side of the Philippines to unload. And like I say, we were back and forth to many of the islands. I have a detailed map here of every place we went to in our journeys, and we have distinction of running so many extra miles that we got a president's citation for it, and we got commendation from our commander, our captain also. Then we went to, we had 3 major battles in the Philippines, and I couldn't tell you where without looking up the history of it. 3 major battles in the Philippines that we unloaded and loaded. Then our next battles were Japan. We had 2 up off Japan, and I couldn't tell you specifically without going to my notes on that one. But I remember we pulled in there at night, and all night long we heard the shelling, and every time the big ships would shell, our ship would move 3 feet in one direction or the other, back and forth and back and forth. We were way out in the harbor. We could not unload until daylight. Daylight came, and I guess I didn't tell you before, but on top of being the cargo ship, we were amphibious, which meant that we had a lot of small boats. Mm-hmm. And this is how the cargo got from the boat, our ship, to the shore with these small boats. We'd unload the boats first, and then put the cargo in small boats, and they would circle until they got the okay to go to the beach, whether it was Red Beach or Blue Beach or whatever. They would drop their ramps, and the cargo would be unloaded or driven off or whatever. Then they would come back to the ship, load up again, make circles until they got the okay to hit a specific beach. And when it came daylight off of Japan, we found out they were in the middle of cruisers and battleships shelling this particular place for 9 days and 9 days straight, 9 days and 9 nights straight. So that's why we couldn't unload when we first got there. But we unloaded all our cargo and got out of there. Then we loaded up and went back to another major battle and unloaded. Sometimes we carried personnel, Marines generally, and we were quite cramped at that time. Fortunately, along the way here, I got sick and tired of deck work, and I put in a transfer for cooks and bakers, and I got it. And I loved cooking and baking. I really enjoyed cooking for 500 guys, because that's what was on our ship. We get up at like 4:30 in the morning and start breakfast, and you talk about eggs. We had like half a ton of eggs we'd have to fix for these guys, and buckwheat pancakes, and fish, because it was frozen at night. In the night meal they'd have fish, or pork chops, or goulash, or whatever. And it was interesting fixing this, because you didn't fix it for 2 or 3, you fixed it for 500. So when you put in like 7 sacks of 50 pounds each of flour, that's what you did to mix it up. Coffee was interesting because we always had a coffee there. This is how we used to soft boil our eggs, because it was a big drippolator, so to speak, and you'd put the coffee in this big strainer and you'd pour maybe 40, 50 gallons of hot water. Well, as the hot water was trickling down, you put your eggs in there and you time them, and when time was up, you brought them out, you had soft boiled eggs. And that worked out pretty good, but in quantity it was tough trying to get them all out before they got too hard. But underway was interesting cooking, because if you had any liquids on the range, and this range was big, you had a pan, say like 4 or 5 inches deep and maybe 18 inches wide by 2 foot long, and if there was any liquid in there and the ship was tossing and turning, you had to be careful so that you didn't get burnt.
Mm-hmm. So how long were you on the deck force versus cook detail?
I would say almost a year, because I was only in the service 2 years. It was supposed to be 2 years and 6 months. I'm sorry, the duration in 6 months. And it just happened to be 2 years before the end of the war. So I was on the deck force probably a good year, and in the cooks and bakers the other year. Can I go back to the deck force?
Sure.
When it came to refueling, whether we gave fuel to the other ship or the ship gave fuel to us, that was interesting, because you take these 2 bobbing corks and you run lines back and forth, and they were never equal at the same time. One was up and one was down, and you had to adjust the lines and the pipes going back and forth. If you didn't, they would break, and you'd have a heck of a mess. Well, some of them broke, we'd have a heck of a mess. But we soon learned to correct that by jockeying the lines back and forth. But sometimes we'd be in night, sometimes we'd of course you couldn't have any lights on, mm-hmm. because you were in a war zone. That was interesting, because you had to almost feel what you did, and by word of yelling back and forth is the only way you could adjust the lines. Sometimes it rained, sometimes it was cold, believe it or not. Sometimes it would go down to 40, and the waves were never less than 8 feet tall, and that was conservative wave. So you're bobbing all over the place. So we got the oil back and forth to whatever we were giving them or taking on oil. Another interesting thing about the deck force was mine sweeping. Well, this wasn't our regular job, but it was mine sweeping. You had these 2 paravanes, which looked like small planes with no motors, mm-hmm. and you'd lower them over the side with big cables, and they would stretch out either side of the ship and at an angle, so that when you met a mine, the mine would hit the paravane. The mine would hit the cable, slide to the paravane, and would cut the cable and bob to the surface. Mm-hmm. That was the theory of it, and it really worked on the whole. Then when you saw a mine, you machine gunned it to explode it, because you didn't want it to hit any ships. And we were generally one of the first ones in lines. Of course, they had mine sweepers that specifically did this, but we were also assigned that job, and luckily nothing happened there to us, to our ship. In convoy, again, I say we were the Coffin's Corner. We were on the corner, and maybe there would be 100 ships there, maybe there would only be 10 ships. But in one incident, we had Japanese planes come over, and we saw them, way up high, and they went past us. We thought they were gone. Well, they circled around, and they came water level between the rows of the ships. You could not shoot them because you were hitting the other ship. So when the planes got ahead of the first line of convoy, and they started to go up, that's when the first ships in line usually got them. I think they got 3, 3 out of, I don't know how many was there. Another interesting thing about the deck force was accidents. On my ship, on the ship that I was on, nobody ever got hurt or killed from combat. It was always accidents. One kid that worked in the galley with me got his fingers cut off in a bread slicer. Another kid got his liver crushed in the hold because a ship or a truck, how should I say, moved, even with the cables on, moved and crushed him between the ship and the truck and the ladder. Another kid got his legs cut off because he was trying to get into a small boat down a Jacob's ladder, and the boat was bobbing all up and down, and he went too low, and the boat came up and severed his legs, and we pulled him up, and he went to sick bay. He lived, but he never had any legs, poor soul. So that's the main accidents I've seen aboard ship. But like I say, nobody ever got hurt from combat. Back to the galley. I have to sort this out because there's 2 times we went to Seattle, Washington. Let's start with the first time. I was on the deck force. I was helmsman, which means steering the ship. And when you got 3 miles out, the pilot had come aboard, and he would take over the navigation of the ship. Well, we went up Puget Sound, and I was helmsman, and the pilot told me to turn such and such a degree, which I did. Answered him back, and I turned that degree, and I held it. And I could see the bridge coming at us. I could just see it, and I just had a sneaking hunch. If he doesn't give me another command, we're going to hit this thing. He didn't give me another command, and we hit the bridge. We were going probably 5 or 6 knots. Well, you take a 500 and some odd foot ship hitting a stationary object, it shook the whole bridge, put a big dent in the bow. So we went to Lake Washington, and we got it fixed. And we had to stay extra time to get it repaired. We went back out again, and we got a summons from Seattle, Washington, that the captain, the pilot, and I were under arrest because we hit the bridge. So Captain Clark says, "You're not going home. You're not going home because we can take care of this thing by radio," which we did. I was disappointed because I figured we'd get back home and, we wouldn't have to be doing this job. The next time we hit Seattle, I was a cook. And I got to digress just a second. When we were in the Philippines under battle, some of the guys went ashore, and there was a dog giving birth to puppies at that particular moment. Well, one of the guys picked up one of the puppies and came back aboard ship, and he nursed the puppy to health, and it was a healthy puppy. And we named it Dulag because that was the name of the little village that they went ashore at. Now, being a cook and baker, when we went into Seattle, all the civilian workers came aboard with their cables and their electric boxes and their hoses and all that other bit. And I was in the galley. I was cooking. And this dog had the run of the ship. In fact, he had a complete jacket, history of Navy, of all the stars and stripes and dog tags and et cetera. And he used to go to bars and drink beers with us just like a sailor. So then, like I say, the civilians came aboard with all their cables and stuff. And it was raining. And I was in the galley, and they had half doors. Well, Dulag come in, and he wanted some food. So I said, "Okay, I'll get you some food." Well, he sat up, and being raining outside, and his body was wet, he sat up, and his tail accidentally touched one of the electrical boxes, and he got a shock. And to that day, to this, he never came near the galley or me because he thought I did it. And I could never get the dog to come near me again.
Hold on a second, we're gonna have to switch tapes. Take a short break.
Good. I'd like a drink of water.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll be right back, and then,
Okay. I hope I'm not jacking around too much here. These things jump into my head as I talk.
that's fine. And we'll come back with some questions. Tape 2, interview with Mr. Donald Walter May on 30 March, Syracuse Armory. Mr. May, we were talking about your time in the galley on the attack transport, and take it from there.
Okay, after the incident with the dog at Seattle, Washington, we went back and forth several times to different places under war conditions, convoy and zigzagging and the whole bit. To total it up, I was in 5 major battles, 3 in the Philippines and 2 in Japan. Then we came back to the Hawaii and unloaded our cargo. From Hawaii, we went to San Francisco, unloaded our cargo, and then I got separated. Then they said, it was 1946 at the time, I think it was in May. They said that you got enough points to get out. Fine. So they separated me right there from San Francisco, and they trained me back and forth to Lido Beach, Long Island. Well, if you know anything about troop trains during the war, it took us like 5 days because the military trains had the right of way. Because we were just going home to be discharged, and the military surplus and supplies and whatnot had the right of way. So I remember one time we stopped at in the middle of the Great Salt Lake, on a spur of the Great Salt Lake, and everybody was just going to jump in the water because how often do you get Great Salt Lake? But the train that went by us had German prisoners with it, and of course it was going very, very slow. And we used to swap vegetables and fruits because, I mean, they didn't have those, so it was kind of ironic that we were giving the German prisoners fruits and vegetables. So we went to Lido Beach, Long Island, and we went through the system of discharge. And like I say, that was in about May 46. Then they sent us home. I never did get into the 5220 club. 5220 club, if you don't know it, you got $20 a week for 52 weeks. That subsided you in case you didn't get a job right away. I never got into that program. I went to work. I went to work at, I think it was a bakery. Yes, it was a bakery up on Geddes Street, up near the reservoir. And then I decided under the GI Bill, I could go to school to be a baker. So I thought, that's a great idea. So I went through all the paperwork and went on this little bakery on the north side called Murr's Bakery, a little German bakery. It was on the corner of, almost on the corner of Carbon and Butternut. And they were nice people to work for. And they had a good business going. However, he didn't pay me much, and I was disappointed in that. And because he thought the GI Bill was picking up the balance, which I just had enough to get along on. Well, time went on, and I worked there for almost a year, and then I got associated. Bob Runyon again introduced me to this girl, Helene Green. And we got chummy, and we started going out on dates. And we went to a party one time, and this was in 47. Went to a party one time, we sat on the front porch about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I says, "You going with anybody?" And she said, "No." And I says, "Okay, you're going with me steady." And then I says, "A year from today, we're going to get married." Well, It happened a little sooner than that. It happened, this was like the beginning of 47, like June, around May or June. It was summertime out. So I went out and told my mother that I was going to get married. Of course, I was 21. Before I got married, I worked at GE. GE plant, an electronics product was just being built. And I was a bricklayer's helper, which was a good job, paid excellent. And I worked there. My dad worked there, and my brother worked there. So we all make good money, and we all travel back and forth, sometimes in the same car. Had a couple incidents there that my brother got in trouble, but I won't get into that. So then I went home and told my mother that I was going to get married, and she says, "Who are you marrying?" And I said, "Helene Green." And she says, "No, you're not." Well, you gotta think of where I was brought up. The North Side, Protestant, very, very German, anti-Catholic, all the way. And so when I told her I was marrying Helene Green, a Catholic, she said, "No, you aren't." Had a little problem there. I was discharged, like I say, I was going to be 21 in August, and this was May, and I says, "Okay, we'll work around this. I won't get married till after I'm 21. So I got married 3 days after I was 21, and my mother couldn't do anything about it. This marriage only lasted 49 years, so something was right. The first child was born a year after we were married, in 1948, and I worked at the Department of Public Works, the Syracuse Department of Public Works, chopping up roads in the summer, raking leaves in the fall, and plowing snow in the winter. I had this job. I had to quit the bakery because I had a son now, and I needed money, and the bakery didn't pay me enough, so I got out of the GI bill there for schooling, and I think that one of the crux of the matter was why I got out of the bakery was because I told my boss that I'm going to take a 4-week honeymoon, and he wasn't happy with that because he needed the help. So we went up to Old Fort Inlet, to be exact, and we spent 4 weeks up there. It was very, very nice. Hot, luckily it was hot. And then when we come home, then I told my father-in-law, who was president of the Teamster Union for the DPW, that I needed a job, and he got me a job driving truck and et cetera there. Worked there for about 6 or 7 years. By that time, I decided that I was going to move to the country. My mother-in-law had a place in Cleveland, New York, and I liked the area. The city was getting bad, and this was in 1948. City was getting bad. So my mother-in-law had a barn in back of the house, which was completely furnished as a house. So I stayed there for a while, and one Thanksgiving I went out there in probably 49 and said that I'm going to stay in the country. And my wife said, "No, I want the city." And I says, "Well, we got a problem here." Well, eventually she came around and we moved to the country. We rented a house north of Cleveland, 3 miles, for $20 a month. And we lived there for 8 years. By that time, I had another child, in fact, 2 more. Michael was the first one. 6 years later, Andy was born. A year later, Gretchen was born. So there were 3 of us in this little house, and 3 kids and us in this little house, and it got too small. So the house next door was my landlord's mother's and father's place. Well, they both died, and the house went up for a welfare auction. I was working at Easy Washer at the time, and I got pretty good there. I was an experimental mechanic for the engineers, which is a super job. So the house next door was going up for auction, and I thought, I want that house. It's a farmhouse. It's got a lot of land. I need that house. I was Catholic at the time. I turned because of the children, not because of me or my wife. I turned because of the children were being brought up Catholic, and I figured I might as well be brought up Catholic. So I did a lot of praying, and I went to the auction, and they were bidding in $100 jumps, and I was bidding in $1 jumps. They'd say 100, and I'd say 101. they'd say 300, 100, 301, and so on. Well, I got the house, 10 acres of ground, full house, a well, a septic tank, etc., for $3,410 back in 1955. Now I had to figure out where the money was coming from because they needed 10% down that day and a balance within a month. So I bummed the 10% down from a friend of mine, and I went to work, and this German fella, Herman Beeling, came up to me and said, "What's the matter with you? You aren't happy." I said, "I got a lot of problems." He said, "What kind?" I said, "Money." He said, "How much you need?" I says, "A lot." "How much?" $5,000. He says, "Bring your lawyer over to my house tonight." And he says, "I'll give you the money." And I didn't know him as well as I know the next guy to me. Luckily, it worked out. I got the money from him. I paid him off in 6 years, and we lived there for 15 years. By that time, I had, after Gretchen, there was Chris, Teresa, and Peter. So I had 6 children. We lived there, we fixed it up a lot. Kids had a lot of fun there. Went to Central Square School, which was about 15 miles away. And all of my children, ironically enough, had the same kindergarten teacher, which was strange. But they all went to Central Square School, and Central Square was a big school on the media at that time, television, radio. So my second son, my third boy, Christopher, became a announcer for television, radio. In fact, he was in Channel 5, Syracuse, for years. Chris May, he was well known at the time, and then he went on to be bigger and better things in the media world. I had a chance to sell the house to get a job next door, which was a 1,000-acre church camp. And this was a camp for retreats and summer tenting, etc. So this guy came over to me and said, "I want you with me." He was the administrator of the camp. And I said, "I can't leave the job I'm on, because after I got through with Easy Washer, because they folded, I went to Carrier." And I worked there for about 8 years, and it was a great job, a lot of money. But I hated the place because it was indoors, and I felt I was locked in. So I was looking for an outside job, and when Dick McCarthy, the administrator, came over and said, "I want you to work with me," he made me a great offer. He gave me a house, X amount of money, and a vehicle, and moved my family in, decorate the house any way I wanted to, and I was buildings and grounds supervisor of the whole 1,000 acres. I really couldn't afford to turn it down. It was a great job. So we went over there, and I held that job for about 8 years. And then some quirk through management decided that they wanted to put somebody else in there, and I was eased out, which was all right, because it was all right. So then I had an occasion to look for a job, and Fulton wasn't too far away. I didn't want to go to Syracuse for a job. Fulton wasn't too far away, so I went to Fulton for interviews. And as I'm driving back home, I see this new building being built. So I had a few resumes. So I stopped at the building, and I said, "What are you building?" And he says, "A nursing home." And I said, "Here's my resume. If you could use me, I would appreciate a job." Before I got home, I had a phone call to come back. So I immediately back, and I got the job. It was an 85-bed nursing home, and I was executive housekeeper. Fine, I could handle that. I worked there for about 6 or 7 years. Then I upgraded to a job for Loretto Geriatric Center. It was a brand new building being built on the near Nedrow, south side of Syracuse. 15 stories, $15 million building, and I don't know how many patients, probably 300, 500, whatever. And I was lucky enough to get that executive housekeeping job, which paid very well. And I was one of the team of support services there, which made me feel very good. The state cut back the funds on that because it was Catholic charity owned but financed by some of the state, I understand. So the state cut back some of the monies on that, so they had to eliminate some jobs. So naturally, they eliminated the high officials before the workers, because you can always get workers. Then I went to another nursing home, and that didn't work out. I was trying to think what I did after the Jewish home. Memory escaping what I did after the second nursing home. Oh yeah, I know what it was. I went to I answered a job ad in the paper, and I got to have a job as a manager of a senior citizen apartment complex. The first one I went to was Radisson out near Ballinsville, and that was 80 units to begin with, and then it jumped up to 120, which made 200 units, and then it jumped up to 350, and I couldn't handle it alone, because I was all alone. I couldn't handle 350 units with just a housekeeper and a part-time maintenance person, because the paperwork was astronomical. I went under several times. So they transferred me to Central Square, and I had 130 apartments there, seniors. Loved the job, great place. I worked there 10 years, and then I had surgery. I had 2 carotid arteries because I had a minor stroke. I was 71, I think I was at that time. And I had 2 minor strokes, so I had 2 carotid arteries repaired. So I figured it was about time I retired. So I retired and went to live at Brighton Towers, which is where I live now. My kids were all over the United States, the East Coast. I have 2 down in Virginia right now, 1 in Detroit, Michigan, 1 in Syracuse, 1 in Cortland, and another one north of Boston in Manchester by the sea. Good kids, very supportive. Since then, my wife had died in 1995 after 49 years of marriage. And I lived at Brighton Towers. And I met this other gal, and we decided to be significant others, which worked out fine for both of us. Back in January of 2001, I had triple bypass. That kind of slowed me down. And as of that date till now, Lord willing, and thank the Lord, I've been healthy as a horse except for little minor scraps. And I guess that ends my life from the time I was a North Sider to now.
Very good. Well, give you a last opportunity here. Anything you would like to add in terms of your World War II experiences? What did they mean to you in terms of your life?
First of all, I didn't have a happy home life because I won't go into that, but I didn't have a happy home life, so I was very glad to get away from home. Mm-hmm. And the Navy was my out. And I had fortitude enough, I had guts enough to do this on my own because I was always pampered. And pampered by the sense of, I was always put down, so to speak. So I had guts enough to do this on my own. I was very proud of myself for doing that. The time in my Navy time for 2 years, I enjoyed every second of it. The ups and downs, the problems, I enjoyed every minute of it because I got away from home. This was a brand new experience. And I traveled and I ate good, which I never had before, which made me feel very, very good. I wouldn't give my Navy experience up for anything. I have a lot of memorabilia here. I go through it often and relive the past. These 2 years in the Navy were my high school because I treat those memories from the Navy as a person that went through high school would treat their memories.
Anything else you'd like to tell us about?
God has been very good to me. He gave me a beautiful wife of many, many years, 6 children, good health to speak of. My children are all out in the world doing very, very well, very profitable for themselves. They married good. I have 4 beautiful daughter-in-laws. I wouldn't give them up for the world. Life has been very good, and I do thank you and everybody else connected with this that I had this opportunity to do this.
Well, thank you.
That was very profitable for me.